afternoon on this Monday, June 23rd. I'm Yuma Nofal. These are today's headlines. U.S. Ambassador David Hale says Washington offers Lebanon its full support to combat terrorism. As radical Sunni militants snatch city after city in their march towards Baghdad, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrives in Iraq. And Syrian rebels recruit teenagers as young as 15 years old to fight the country's civil war. This is in a report released by Human Rights Watch. U.S. Ambassador David Hale is warning the Lebanese against being dragged into the region's crises and says Lebanon needs a fully functioning governance so that international assistance becomes effective. Upholding the Babda Declaration and adopting a true policy of dissociation from the conflict in Syria are essential, Hale said, following talks with the Premier Tamam Salam at the Grand Sarai. The U.S. Embassy quoted him as saying the region's battles must not be fought in Lebanon, and he took that opportunity to reiterate his call for the immediate election of a new head of state, which he described as a challenge. He also stressed that the election is a Lebanese affair, but costs of indecision felt by everyone with a stake in Lebanon's stability and prosperity.
I just met with Prime Minister Salam, and we had a good meeting and discussed many issues facing our two countries, including our strong support for Lebanon's security and for Lebanon's management of the spillover from the war in Syria. Friday's bombing, the loss of an ISF officer and the injuries to others, and the various security operations reinforce America's commitment to Lebanon's safety and its security. A stable Lebanon is more important than ever. Lebanon's government and security institutions are working hard and effectively to counter terrorism and maintain the country's stability. We stand by your side and offer our full support and assistance. This is a time to close gaps so that Lebanon's security and stability can be reinforced. Upholding the Babda Declaration and adopting a true policy of dissociation from the conflict in Syria are essential. The region's battles must not be fought in Lebanon, but that means Lebanese should not be drawn into the battles being fought by others elsewhere. A challenge that is for the Lebanese alone is to resolve the election of a Lebanese president. For international assistance to be effective, Lebanon's friends seek fully functioning partners of governance in the presidency, parliament, and the cabinet. The decisions are for the Lebanese, but the costs of indecision will continue to be felt by everyone with a stake in Lebanon's stability and security. We urge intensified effort to elect a president.
Interior Minister Nuhad Mashnou is expressing support for Speaker Nabih Berri's move to boost the number of security forces in order to help fight terrorism. He said, I support Berri's proposal, particularly since there is an unprecedented deployment of the Lebanese army and security forces along the border, which require additional members as well as raising the alert level to maximum. This is what Mashnou said in remarks published Monday by the local daily As-Safir. And he said he would prod the government into recruiting 3,000 members for the army and 1,000 members each for general security and the internal security forces in a bid to beef up security. He made the comments when speaking on an alleged plot to assassinate him and carry out bombings in Lebanon. Iraqi's Premier Nouri al-Maliki's security spokesman says that hundreds of Iraqi soldiers have been killed by Sunni Arab militants in a major offensive that has overrun vast tracts of the country. The announcement on television by Lieutenant General Qasim Atta is the most specific information provided thus far by the government on Iraqi security forces casualties since the insurgents launched their offensive on June 9th. The government has issued a steady stream of statements which cannot be independently verified, announcing the death of hundreds of militants, but has yet to provide a concrete figure for its own casualties. The offensive, spearheaded by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant jihadists, but involving other groups as well, has swept through major areas of 5 different provinces. Iraqi security forces wilted during the initial onslaught and are now struggling to hold ground in the face of the onslaught. And John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, has arrived in Baghdad to discuss the crisis in Iraq with the top leaders as the Sunni fighters continue to make gains, as we said, against the government forces in the north of the country. He is the U.S. Secretary of State. He's meeting with the Shia Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and Sunni and Kurdish leaders on his visit. And a statement department spokesman said Kerry would discuss U.S. actions underway to assist Iraq as it confronts this threat and urges Iraqi leaders to move forward as quickly as possible with a government formation process that can represent the interests of all Iraqis.
The message to any country from anywhere, or any individual from anywhere, is that there is no safety margin whatsoever in funding a group like ISIL, and we particularly discourage individuals in the region who may have been sending money through some innocent charity or through various back-channel initiatives under the guise that it's for the general welfare and benefit of people who've been displaced, but then that money finds its way into the hands of terrorists. President Obama and the administration have proposed providing the full amount of aid, the $650 million that comes with the first certification, and the House of Representatives has passed that amount. It's the Senate that had a slight reduction and a different formula. We will work that out. He gave me a very strong sense of his commitment to make certain that the process he has put in place, a reevaluation of human rights legislation, a reevaluation of the judicial process, and other choices that are available, are very much on his mind, and that he's only been in office for 10 days.
Coming up next, Jersey Boys open in the theater. The music when we return. Welcome back. You're watching Future Television. 2 Al Jazeera English journalists have been sentenced to 7 years in jail, and one of them to 10 years by an Egyptian court on charges including aiding the Muslim Brotherhood and reporting false news. The guilty verdicts were delivered by a judge against Peter Gresti, Mohammed Fahmy, and Bahir Mohammed. Gresti and Fahmy were sentenced to 7 years in jail, while Bahir Mohammed was sentenced to an additional 3 years for possession of ammunition. Mohammed was in possession of a spent bullet he had found on the ground during a protest. Other Al Jazeera journalists being tried in absentia were sentenced to 10 years, and Al Jazeera has always rejected these charges against its journalists and maintains their innocence. The prosecution said Gresti, Al Jazeera's East Africa correspondent, and his Egypt bureau colleagues aided the Brotherhood and produced false news reports of the situation in Egypt. Big news today with Syrian rebels are said to be recruiting teenagers as young as 15 years old to fight in the country's civil war, according to the New York-based Human Rights Watch, which released its report earlier this morning. They said that the rebels have been using child soldiers in roles ranging from soldiers and snipers to stretcher bearers and suicide bombers. The horrors of Syria's armed conflict are only made worse by throwing children into the front lines. According to the 31-page report, various factions in the country's civil war have recruited minors, including the Western-backed Free Syrian Army, the Islamic Front, the Nusra Front, as well as the Al-Qaeda breakaway Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Military and police forces in Kurdish-controlled areas have also used teenagers, it said. HRW said the Nusra Front and ISIL have both targeted children through education programs, which include military training. Teenage former fighters told Human Rights Watch how commanders encourage the youth to volunteer for suicide missions. Israeli warplanes bombed a series of targets inside Syria earlier this morning in response to a cross-border attack that killed an Israeli teenager a previous day, according to the Israeli military. Israel said it struck 9 military targets inside Syria, and direct hits were confirmed. The targets were located near the site of Sunday's violence in the Golan Heights and included a regional military command center and unspecified launching positions. There was no immediate response from Syria. This time it was the United States that gave up a dramatic goal. Portugal's Silvestre Varela scored on a strong-headed goal deep in stoppage time to give Portugal a desperate 2-2 draw with the United States in a key Group G World Cup match at Manas, Brazil. You can see the Americans cheering on our screens. The goal in the 95th minute came from a cross of Cristiano Ronaldo, who showed no signs of a knee injury that was much of a subject of media attention in the build-up to the contest. The Americans will win the group with a victory, but could also advance to the round of 16 with a draw and a tie in the other match, which will be played at the same time. Now, you may know the song Can't Take My Eyes Off of You. It's one of the most popular love songs out there, but do you know who the original singer is or how it came to be? Well, Jersey Boys is the story of 4 young men from the wrong side of the tracks in New Jersey who came together to form the iconic 1960s rock group, the Four Seasons. The American biographical musical drama film is directed by Clint Eastwood and based on the Tony Award-winning musical of the same name.
You want to hear the real story? I'm the one you want to talk to, Tommy DeVito. Wasn't for me, we all would have wound up with a bullet in our head.
Friends like that, you should change your name to Sinatra.
I'm gonna be as big as Sinatra.
I would love to introduce you to a new discovery of mine, Frankie Valli.
I heard them all, but I never heard a voice like Frankie Valli.
How old are you?
Together or separately?
Big girls. Got a success now. The records, the TV, the personal appearances.
They asked her what was the high point. But 4 guys under a street lamp. First time we made that sound, our sound. That was the best.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Four Seasons!
It's Mark Zander, Bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our top stories. U.S. Ambassador David Hale says Washington is offering Lebanon its full support to combat terrorism. As radical Sunni militants snatch city after city in their march towards Baghdad, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrives in Iraq. And Syrian rebels recruit teenagers as young as 15 to fight in the country's civil war, according to Human Rights Watch. This wraps up your Monday headlines live on Future Television. I'm Yumna Nofal in Beirut, wishing you a good night.